Well, good afternoon. I apologize for not able to give the presentation last Tuesday. Um, we went to Minnesota for Thanksgiving with my son. He's 7 months old. Came back. We met probably 20 kids there. Came back. He got pretty sick. And for the last 6, 7 days or 5 days, I've been struggling. So hopefully the last two lectures that we have is gonna go well. I'm sure it will. So the reason why we're doing, I would hope to have more, usually we do a journal club where we have a lot more students participate in journal club where you discuss the paper in detail. But it's okay. What we do today is we're going to go through a paper. This is a research paper by Andrew Wakefield, published in Lancet 1998. I keep mentioning this paper for the last few lectures. It is when the paper came out, it created an explosion in terms of the controversies in vaccine autism. And this is the landmark paper that initiated that whole process. So it's important that we go back and understand how a paper like this could advance or not advance some of the controversies, the factual that we discussed in the last few weeks. Let's get started. Now, you're going to see the big word retracted over this paper because the article was retracted by the Lancet journal. And because of that, they put the big word on it. So there's no way to get rid of it unless I get it in 1998. Okay, here's the beginning. So again, the title of the research article is Ileolymphoid nodular hyperplasia, nonspecific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children. This is referring to this disorder is autism. And it's done by the first authors, Andrew Wakefield, and there's, I think, 10, 11 authors, co-authors in this paper. So what did they want to do? They wanted to investigate a series of children, and in this study it's about 12 of them, with chronic enterocolitis and then regressive developmental disorder. Now, chronic enterocolitis is inflammatory bowel disease that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And it's a journal club. We're going to go through the methodology, the results, the conclusion they make, and how the impact that has impacted our notion of this idea. So in the methodology, they have 12 children. The mean age is 6 years of age. They range from 3 years old to 10 years old. There's a total of 11 boys. So when you look at autism, it tends to favor boys than girls. So there are a lot of boys that have that the disorder. And these children are referred to the pediatric gastroenterology unit with a normal history of development. However, they lost some of the acquired skills, include language, together with diarrhea, pain. The children underwent some of the gastroenterological examination, neurological development examination. They did a bunch of tests on them. They actually they took the biopsies. They actually they went into the intestines and get little tissues in the intestine. They did MRI. They did EEG. This is look at the brain activity. They did a lumbar puncture. This is the spinal tap, right under sedation. It can be extremely painful to get the cerebral spinal fluid. And then they were injected with barium to see the structures of the intestine. And they will form some of the biomedical and immunological profiles were examined. So these children went through a litany of tests to determine if there's a correlation between their inflammatory bowel problem and their regressive developmental disorder. Now, table 1, this is the clinical details in the laboratory tests that some of the all the kids went through. And then you look at here again. There were 12 of them. They age from 3 to 11, and again they're mostly male. The one female is here. Again, they did a bunch of tests on them, and you can see they did the hemoglobin tests. They did the packed cell volume, look at lymphocyte level, platelets. These are white blood cells, eosinophils. So these are normal standard tests. And if you look at below here, you can see the range of a normal range versus abnormal range. So some of them, the levels are too high, you know. And then when they examine the endoscopic findings, what they find in that intestine. And you can see here, a majority of them tend to have LNH, which stands for lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. Okay, and think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them develop this lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. Now, this is when you look at the lining of the intestines, you can see little nodules in there. So it's a small cluster of nodules, which is not supposed to be there. It's a good indication of inflammation when they see little nodules in there. Some of them tend to, when you look at histology, we will see later, they're going to have a lot of lymphocytes in there, which is abnormal, an indication of inflammation. Right? Lymphocytes not going to go there, and they form a little place called a thing called germinal center. So they are structurally defined structure when you look at the histology of that nodule. So 10 out of 12 kids were diagnosed with lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. Again, this is some of the histological findings, and that we go a little bit later. But basically, they tend to have an acute chronic non-specific colitis. So they have the colons inflamed in most of the kids that they examine. Now, when they do some of the neurological abnormalities, clinical examinations, there's none really in all of them. And the MRI scans were normal. We look at the brain activity, the EEGs are normal. They did the cerebrospinal fluid profile were normal. They were Fragile X negative. This is an extra piece of repeats on one of the genes in the X chromosome. It's a good indication of when you have this repeats, you tend to have some sort of a abnormal neurological development or retardation. And then when they look at these kids, they tend to have very normal salutary achievement of early milestone small children. Now, then they examined some of the neuropsychiatric diagnosis. Okay, so the development is normal. Now, in terms of look at the psychiatric evaluation of these kids. If you look at here, this is again this child 1 to 12. Then you look at behavioral diagnosis. A majority of them have developed with autism. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 out of 12 were diagnosed with autism. Then they look at whether they have exposed to the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccines. Look at here, all of them got the vaccine, okay, the MMR vaccine. And then they look at the interval from exposure to first behavioral problem. So they look at when they first were immunized, and then how long it took them to show signs of some sort of behavioral abnormality. Okay, you see here some of them are with 1 week. The second child is in 2 weeks, 40 hours. So and then 1 week, 24 hours. So some of the behavioral changes are pretty drastic as soon as they get the vaccine. As soon as they get the vaccine here, which is quite striking. Now, how did they diagnose this behavior? It's just by the parents, and some of them are by the pediatrician, but majority by the parents. My child got vaccinated a couple of weeks ago, probably a month ago. Usually within 40 some hours of that, he's very fussy. Is that a sign of autism? We don't, it's just hard to tell. But so these are what the parents observed that some of the kids went through. Okay. They look at the features associated with exposure. Some of the symptoms are associated. Okay, we got fever, delirium. Okay, that's said to be normal. The second child, self-injury, rash, fever, repetitive behavior, self-injury, loss of self-help, rash, fever. So you start seeing a pattern of could be normal behavior, could be normal, fever is pretty normal after you get vaccinated, or it could not. But this is what the parents and some of the physicians observed. Then they look at the age where they start to see the first symptoms of behavioral problem. Some of the first kid 12 months, 13 months, 14 months, 5 to 6 years. So there's a period of time where majority of them actually exhibit some sort of a behavioral problem after the vaccination. Now, then they look at if they have any bowel problem in terms of do they develop any inflammatory problem. There's going to be a note here saying that it's hard to tell, and this is all by the observation of the parents. But some of them actually develop some other problem, the bowel problem. Now, this is based on the publication that I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, the first study they looked at, where they indicate that if you vaccinate with the measles vaccine, okay, this is by published a paper, I think 3 years before this paper, that if you vaccinate the measles vaccines, it will get into your intestines and it will damage your intestines. Okay, so because of that, this is a follow-up study where say, okay, if you do get the vaccination, do you get a bowel problem, inflammatory bowel disease? Now, so a summary here is in 8 children, the onset of behavioral problems are linked to, again, observation by the parents or by the child physician. It linked to the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination, okay? And 5 had an early adverse reaction to immunization. Like I said, they went to some of the features associated with exposure, like fever, delirium, convulsions. Now, in the 8 children, the average interval from exposure to first behavioral problem were about 63 days. Like I said, the parents were not sure about the abdominal symptoms because they said the kids were not totally trained or not able to communicate at that point. Then in figure 1, they look at the urinary methylmalonic acid excretion patients and controls. Now, why this is important? this is an indication of whether you have a B12 vitamin deficiency. Okay, if you don't have vitamin B12, it will not properly metabolize the methylmalonic acid. Because of that, you will have high levels. Now, this is also have to do with how the integrity of the intestines. Okay, if it is destroyed, you don't have the vitamin B12 absorption, then you have high levels of the acid. So they look at patients and controls. Now, the one thing that I don't have is the controls here. I could not find where they get the controls. I could not, whether they are just healthy individuals or whatever, I could not find. But if you look at the patients here, there's no data. If you look at the table 1 and 2, there's no data on the controls. But you have data on the patients here. And you can see that patients tend to excrete high level of the methylmalonic acid versus controls. Okay? Now, interestingly, this one figure here has some sort of creates own evolve into a therapy. Is that if your kids are autistic, you can actually, one of the therapy they do, alternative therapy they do, is give them vitamin B12 to hopefully lower the acid to look like control. But that's a side note. Then they look at the endoscopic view of the ileum in child 3 in one of the children. And you can see here, now this is a normal inside of intestine of a colon here. Okay? Now you look at A and B, you can start seeing little nodules here. And that's exactly what I said about the hyperplastic nodular lymphoid. Right here, you can see little nodules here. And when you look at the histology of that, so this is a summary of that. Again, the 8 that were diagnosed with autism, they tend to have colonic, rectal, mucosal abnormalities. That include granularity, loss of vascular pattern, patchy euthermia, lymphoid molecular hyperplasia that I show you. And then all of this are an indication of Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. Again, the most striking and consistent feature of all of them are the lymphoid molecular hyperplasia of the terminal ileum. We didn't see in a number of children. If you look at the histology of those little nodules here, you can start seeing the infiltrations of male lymphocytes. These are B cells, T cells, macrophage that get in there and then start occupying the biopsies. And this is the little cells here. We have to open up the magnification to see what exactly the cells are, but you see all little things here? Those are cells, lymphocytes that get into the follicles, and are indication of inflammation. So it's a very short paper, right? It's a short paper describing the enterocolitis problems in kids who are autistic. Okay, and they show that a majority of children that they looked at do have the intestinal problem, and they are autistic. Okay, so the conclusion that they make is that we describe a pattern of colitis and ileal lymphoid modular hyperplasia in children with developmental disorders that we saw. The intestinal and behavioral pathologies may have occurred together by chance. So this connection, this association might be happened by chance. Or it could reflect a selection of bias in a cell referral group. which means all the patients they got, they all have this particular problem. They all have intestinal problem. They all have autism, and they go self-refer to his study. Okay. However, the uniformity of the intestinal pathology changes, and the fact that previous studies have found intestinal dysfunction in children with autistic spectrum disorders suggests that the connection is real, reflects a unique disease process. Now, he's saying this because in prior studies where they use the same children, okay, they have identified the measles vaccines in their stomach, in their biopsies. But it didn't connect to autism. But now they're saying that these measles vaccines are destroying the intestines, and that lead to, and that you see that in the autistic spectrum disorder children. Okay, so the conclusion that the connection they saw is not by chance, but is by real, and it reflects a unique disease process. Now, we have to see if we buy the argument. So if you look at what we talked before, the same patient they looked at, they did a process to determine whether you have the virus in the biopsies or the intestine. They use a process called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. It allowed you to amplify the sequence of the RNA of the virus. Okay, if you see a band or if you see positive, then you know it's there. Well, it turns out a number of studies that follow up his study could not find that virus using the same process, the PCR chain reaction. Okay, so the conclusion that he made based on the fact that in their prior studies they have shown the presence of the MMR of the measles virus and the connection with the intestinal problem could not be reproducible. Okay, now then they went on and they hypothesized a mechanism, and basically what he said is the opioid excess theory of autism. This is his theory. Now, I actually looked up some of the publications here, and this studies are published in very, very low impact, some sort of hidden journal. I don't know what they are. It's kind of interesting, but they were published. I don't know if they peer review or not, but they were published. What his theory is suggesting that that when proposing that autistic disorder results from an incomplete breakdown of excessive absorption of gut-derived peptide from foods. So if you eat something from barley, rye, oats, and casein from milk, right? Because you have an intestinal problem, you have a that it cannot break down those products. Okay, now this product now will bind to the peptidase enzymes that are required to break down this product, and because of this, it get to your brain, as I mentioned before, and it disrupts the normal neural regulation of brain development by endogenous encephalins and endorphins. This hypothesized mechanism is saying that if you have, I think I mentioned before, if you have undigested products like milk and gluten, right? It will get to your brain, and somehow that some sort of create inflammation in the brain, and that leads to autism. Okay. There is no evidence of that. And because of this proposal, because of this proposed hypothesis, it lead to a therapy where you don't eat gluten, you don't eat milk, and that hopefully you don't eat any carbohydrates, barley, rye, oats, and that somehow improve your symptom of autism. So why this paper is so important? Because whatever they proposes here, people are actually reading this paper and actually follow the hypothesis. So it's fascinating. I publish a lot of papers, and no one actually follows anything that I do. So, in conclusion, we have identified a chronic enterocolitis in children that may be related to neuropsychiatric dysfunction. In most cases, onset of the symptoms was after measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine immunization. So I want to stress that. In most cases, onset of symptoms were after measles, mumps, and rubella immunization. Okay? So, is it by, again, we talk about this, is it by chance? Or there's a causality, a causality in this process? Okay? Now, he did say that further investigations are needed to examine these symptoms as possible relation to this vaccine. So there's some doubt in that hypothesis that he suggested that we need a bigger study, right? Which is fine. Now, then we look at the acknowledgement, because I'm going to tell you why acknowledgement is so important. Because when we publish a paper, we have to tell the funding source of that study. Okay, it would help with the conflict of interest, because I cannot publish a paper from that I get support from a pharmaceutical company where the data it's supporting the clinical trials, and I'm not disclose that. So here, the study was supported by the special trustees of Royal Free Hampstead NHS Trust and Children Medical Charity. And then he went on to thank people. We're going to get back to why this is important. There's missing funding sources here that we have to know. So let's go back to the methodology. Go back to what is the problem with this paper. Again, they recruited 12 children, okay, and they were referred they were self-diagnosed by the parents or by their clinicians, and referred to his study, okay. Like I said here, and then in terms of the developmental diagnosis, were a prospective developmental records from parents, health visitors, and general practitioners. 4 children did not undergo psychiatric assessment in the hospital. Now, to diagnose kids with some sort of developmental disability, I think you need more than parents and general practitioners. You need specialists, psychiatrists. So when I see this, I'm seeing very general observations that parent can make. And then, like I said, 4 of them did not undergo a psychiatric assessment in the hospital. Now, when we look at the 12 children here in the study, I see a few problems. First of all is the patient sampling. So when we recruit cohort for our study, there's a few ways to do it. You can do randomized clinical trials, right, where you have 2 huge populations and you divide them by 2. One treat, one untreat, but it's randomly selected. Okay, so that's usually what they do. Now this can be very expensive, sometimes not feasible, because if you have a drug, right, you don't know whether the treated population will affect by the doses or not. You can't treat it the same, so it can be challenging and expensive. But that's the right way of doing it. You have a control, and the treated and untreated, you randomly select them for that. And then you have a case control study. Now, again, so this is when you're trying to test a hypothesis, okay? So you split the population in half. Now, it's a case-control study, so there's no random. This is when patients come in, they have a problem, the patient cohort, and you have a control that in control. So you don't have it's not randomized. And then this is the study that he presented here. It's called a symbol case series. So this is a when you see an interest observation, right? You want to test it. So if you are a physician and you have 10 kids come in and they have fever, and somehow the day before that they went to the beach. So like the question is, somehow going to the beach caused them to have fever, right? So these are very simple observations that you want to look at. Is that true or not? And the other thing is that the selection bias because of that, because you have a population of patients that have all the symptoms already, and you want to test the hypothesis true or not. So he wanted to test whether kids who are autistic, or if you have an intestinal problem, or no, actually, he recruited kids with who are autistic, and he wanted to know whether they have the intestinal problem or not, whether they have the vaccine or not. Okay, so this is a very selective group of patient cohort. So there's selection bias. Now, N of 12 is extremely small. Okay, you can't really make a conclusive conclusion based on a sample of 12. And especially there's no controls for the study. Did he look at kids who are, get the vaccine, but never have the intestinal symptoms, or even if they develop autistic or not, if they get the vaccine without the intestinal problem? There are a few controls that are missing here. Or did he look at kids who are autistic but just normal, who have no intestinal problem, which is a lot of them, who got the vaccine, no intestinal problem? Did he look at that? No. So there's a few missing control for the study. Okay. The other thing is that the reliability of clinical and psychological data. Like I said, it relied on the parents' post-facto recollection of vaccinations and onset of symptoms. If your kid start to have fever, acting strange, you start label your kid with certain disorder, right? Even though maybe this is part of a normal reaction to a vaccine. Because there's an emotional attachment to seeing your kid suffer, and you want to have an explanation why. The other thing we look at is he kept referring to the fact that all the kids that get vaccinated, the vaccine tend to reside in the intestines. This is based on a previous study that he published that I mentioned to you. When they try to repeat that data, they couldn't do it. So there's no evidence that the vaccine viruses in the bowel, in the brain of patient to study. But according to this group, it is. But when other people are trying to repeat that data, they couldn't do it. So there's some faults in the patient sampling and the examination of the clinical data, and then how they make their prediction for the so the paper published in 1998, so 6 years later, Brian Deer, he's an investigative reporter of the Sunday Times of London, okay? And he investigated the paper and the people involved in the study. And he found a few interesting studies of things about Andrew Wakefield. First of all, Wakefield have written that his research was approved by the Ethical Practices Committee. The committee have never approved Wakefield's study. Now, this is very important because you probably don't appreciate this, but every time you have patients in your study, you have to get, in the US, this is the UK, but you have to get the internal review board approve your study before you can actually recruit them. And when you publish something like that, you have to indicate, the actual, it stands for IRB, Internal Review Board. You have to indicate the number, and other people have access to that. This is a huge thing, okay? The patient has to be informed consent of their participation. So, even though he mentioned that his study got approved, turns out it didn't get approved. And that is the number one ground for any rejection. The other thing that it's kind of striking is that, like I said, he subjected all these children, all these tests. I'm sure it's not easy to do a spinal tap. I mean, would you let your kids get a spinal tap? It's very painful. They've been sedated. They have to get the intestines biopsies where they actually have a little knives to go into the stomach and actually take a little biopsy out. All the tests they got through. I mean, this could kill your kid. So you want to make sure there's a contingency in place to make sure that everything goes fine. And that's when the committee actually look at that. Okay. Now, in the acknowledgement I mentioned, he mentioned he got some funding sources from the hospital. Well, it turns out he didn't mention one of the biggest supporter donors of his study. He got $100,000 from a personal injury, Richard Barr. Okay? Now, why this is important? This is important because Richard Barr is a lawyer that is involved in a lawsuit against a company that makes the MMR vaccine. Okay? And then 5 of his autistic children were referred by Richard Barr. So what happened here is that you have parents wanted to sue the UK government or the pharmaceutical company, went to Richard Barr to be their clients, to be his clients. He referred them to Wakefield to participate in his study. And guess what? The result is exactly what he wanted to see. That the vaccine causes intestinal problems, then led to autism. Okay? So, these patients are not routinely admission to the hospital, which what we often see is chance here. They are coordinated patients that referred to him by this lawyer, which supported his study. Okay? Well, so he did an additional investigation. He discovered that the medical team that set up by Richard Barr actually give Wakefield up to $800,000 to support his research. And he did not disclose that in the acknowledgement. So there's a huge breach in the conflict of interest that we have to appreciate. The other thing that he found out that Wakefield actually filed a patent application where he wanted to separate out the vaccines individually. So this MMR are the combination of 3 vaccines, and his patent where he wanted just to have one vaccine be injected, and that somehow will not lead to developmental disorder. In addition to giving Wakefield $800,000, the Barr's team have given money to John O'Leary, $1 million, and he actually are the big share owners of Unigenetics. Why this company is important? Because they actually did all the polymerase chain reaction testing for all these patients. So when I said that when they look at the biopsies, they have presence of viruses, the measles viruses in the intestine. These are the companies that actually test their products. Well, it turns out there are a few things with this company is that, which were disclosed by the co-author, is that all the sample they tested were contaminated with positive result. So once you have a reaction that is contaminated with positive result, you're going to see everything's positive. Okay? But if you do your experiment cleanly, then it wouldn't have cross-contamination. So when we do something like that, we have to repeat it a couple of times and by different individuals to make sure that there's no contamination in that. So this is a company that tested that the reaction, the polymerase chain reaction, and show that the patients are positive for the measles vaccines. Then, in addition, the team gave money to Kenneth Atkins, Walter Spitzer, some of this. Why are these people important? Because they all supported the claims. And the claim is that vaccine causes intestinal disorder, inflammatory disease, and that led to autism. In one way or the other, they all support that concept. And they were funded by the law firm that's going to sue a pharmaceutical company. So it's kind of interesting. Now, Dr. Paul Offit, he's a pediatrician at UPenn, and in his book called The Autism False Prophets, he challenged Wakefield explanations of how MMR causes autism. Remember, it's actually a well-written book, and I would recommend people to read the book. He laid out very clearly how the fallacies and the narrative that Wakefield presented, actually not just Wakefield, but the whole community of the anti-vaccine presented. And it has the pro and con of both sides. It's quite fascinating reading. Like I said, he had stated that there's no persistent measles virus in tissue of autistic children. Okay, so the work of Unigenetics, from the work of others who look at thousands of samples, they can never find measles virus in the tissues of autistic children that Wakefield and his group claimed. He stated that MMR does not cause leaky gut. That means it doesn't destroy the gut where now you have proteins go back and forth in your brain and your stomach and the blood system. He also looked at the fact that only 1 out of 5 children had bowel problems before they died, they would develop autism. Okay, now remember that. Only 1 out of 5 have bowel problems before they develop autism. Okay, so if bowel problem is a problem, they should all have bowel problems before they develop autism, not just 1 out of 5. Okay. The other things that he mentioned, which I discussed a couple of weeks ago, is that harmful proteins should go back and forth. If you have the food products or food protein not breaking down, go to your brain. When you look at your stool sample, you should see that, right? It cannot go one way, not the other way. When they look at that, they don't see any harmful gut protein in the stool. So there's only one way going up, not going down, so that's impossible. And then we discussed in the combination of MMR vaccines overwhelm a young child developing the immune system. Now, this is important. I mean, we talked about how when you look at a neonate or a child immune system, it's compromised a little because of the naive and the incomplete immune system, right? But what interesting is the combination of MMR vaccines only have about, I think, 150 with 4 different injection proteins in them, okay? Now, back in the day, before the 70s, you have the smallpox vaccine, which has about 200 proteins. And in the 70s, the rate of autism, didn't go up, very few. So if overwhelming the system is a combination of vaccination, then you just see a lot more kids who are autistic back in the 70s with smallpox vaccine. So the ideas of having a combination of vaccine leading to autism, it seems to be a little far-fetched. So, in conclusion, the study, it's a good study in terms of of looking at something that is important and we have to look at. Is there a cause of intestinal problem or a correlation between vaccine, intestinal problem, and autism? That's a good thing to look at. But the way they presented that study is incomplete, has a lot of faults in it, and especially in the methodology. Okay? And you cannot make a leap in a conclusion like that if you have such a small population sampling. And you have to declare your conflict of interest, because if you have an interest in what you do, you tend to create a distrust in the people trying to look at your paper, your work. So there's a lot of faults in here that I, as a scientist, can see. But unfortunately, it gains a lot of attraction. You get a lot of attraction. And it hasn't died down. It's still a very strong force in the movement. Okay? So what happened is that in the next lecture here, we will discuss how his work and others who believe in him have pushed the movement of linking association between vaccination and autism. Okay? Thank you.